I'm Japanese, and I was working in Japan in media before the internet. And everywhere I saw was this ladder where you didn't actually have any decision-making power, ability to act until you're about 45. And when the internet happened, so the internet's not a technology. I think it's really kind of a fundamental philosophy, which is the ability to innovate without asking permission. And so this permissionless innovation, this ability for a 20-year-old to just start an ISP, to start a company, that was what the internet was about. And I think that it unleashed this explosion of innovation, but it makes life a lot more complex and hard to predict. And you know, the kids that were born sort of after internet are thriving in this sort of, permissionless innovation world. And I think those people who have been in institutions where things have been about planning and thinking and permission-based are having trouble.
Frans, you come from an interesting background.
You think? Okay.
I do.
I grew up in Sweden. My dad is Swedish, and my mother's Black, African American, and Cherokee. So I was, the typical Swede. When I looked around, lots of people like me, except maybe my sister. That's the other one. And I think that gave me a different perspective on the world. Once I got to the States, I went to college here. It really wanted me to explore these different intersections, either between different cultures, which is the way I grew up, but also between different industries, fields, disciplines. And what I discovered was that at these intersections, that is where actually the real new groundbreaking ideas happen. That's what happened when I started various companies I was exposed to, but also in my research with people that were breaking new ground. Almost always, they were either coming at something from this area and headed into something else, either on purpose or accidentally. But it was when they were able to connect these different aspects that they broke new ground, whether it's sort of architects learning from termites how to design new buildings, or fashion designers. The woman who designed the burkini, I'll talk about in my most recent book, you're combining a bikini and a burqa. It doesn't seem to connect, but actually in reality, they do connect. And when you make that connection, you break new ground.
You have a great exercise in your book, Medici Effect, that I want you just to throw it out to everybody in the audience. It's kind of fun to do if you just have a few minutes of downtime, about how we have to break down our barriers and our assumptions to get to anything new.
Yeah, there's a number of ways. The one I think I have to talk about there is you're reversing assumptions. You almost go into any given situation with a certain number of assumptions. You don't even necessarily know what they are, right? So, you could, for instance, at one point, everybody assumed that a search page would have to have, the search bar and then a ton of other stuff on there, like a link to horoscopes and all the kind of stuff. And then if you say, I'm going to reverse these things, what happens if I say there's going to be virtually nothing on that page, and you can create something like Google? What happens if you reverse the assumption that you can't see through cement? Well, it means that you can't see through cement. And a company in Hungary did that. They placed sort of optical fibers throughout the cement to create see-through cement. And it's just this amazing innovation. But the point is, you don't get there unless you actually take those assumptions that you make and reverse them. Only problem is it's hard to do. I mean, I'm sure you run into this all the time with the people that you work with within the media lab, that when they come to you, there are certain things that they can actually see past. And maybe you can do it because you haven't even been involved with their business.
I mean, yeah, a lot of it is about deprogramming. I know, like, the next speaker, Ken Robinson, talks a lot about how, because we have a lab called Lifelong Kindergarten, because kindergarten kind of works, because people are free. And I often do a poll that you ask people, how good were you at painting when you were in kindergarten? Everybody will say, it was like Picasso. And then today, people don't paint. And you somehow start to self-limit yourself. Mm-hmm. And a lot of creativity, because in the old days it was doing what you were told was kind of the survival trait in the Industrial Revolution. Today, when we are trying to innovate, you want creativity, but creativity is stifled through our process as long as we're aging. And what we try to do at the Media Lab is to try to strip away those barriers that you've created for yourselves and for the companies that work with us. So we have what we call completely undirected research, where we don't know the answer. We don't do that much directed grants. So, because a grant proposal is, here's the answer I'm looking for, give me some money to get it, right? So you fundamentally can sort of figure it out as you go along. And so if you have a critical mass of people who are already have that passion, that helps. A lot of it is completely changing the rules. But a lot of it is the reward system, and we were, some of the earlier presentations about focus. I mean, we cherish focus and execution, but that just means you don't have peripheral vision anymore. And it's about, and in your book you talk about this a lot, like you can't get lucky if you plan everything, you know, and you need the luck.
And that's the thing. I mean, when you go into a situation like that, you almost want to feel that you're in control about the outcome. I mean, the reason I'm spending days or weeks or months or money on this is because I want this particular type of outcome. But the true breakthroughs are never sort of logical. If they were logical, everybody would be doing them already. It's something serendipitous, something unexpected that brought you to this other place. And even I think if you realize that, I think it could be hard to do because you still want sort of that. It goes back to kind of what Ariel was talking about, that you taking that first step of uncertainty is perhaps not, you're not open for it because you know that this piece works and it gives you a certain amount of return. And as long as you can sort of continue on that, great.
Joe, how do you, I'm sorry, go ahead. How do you handle a student, somebody creative who's very interested but is hyper-focused, has just laser-like focus at one thing and how they want to study it? How do you challenge that student?
So the focus and the searching are really important, but you need both, right? So when you do mushroom hunting, you can't focus or you'll never see them because you only focus on 1% of your field of view and you focus out and you get peripheral vision. But when you're driving the mushrooms home, you kind of have to focus on the road, right? And so I think the ability to switch back and forth between sort of left brain, right brain, whatever you want to call it, is really important. So it's not that focus is bad, but it's ability to pull out that's really important. But a lot of it is about teaching through doing. So like the presentations and the books, and even fundamentally this mode, we study and we understand that we're no longer creative. Right. But to actually then become creative is a whole different thing. And this is where it becomes kind of spiritual. Like I was trying to learn to meditate with a yoga teacher, and he said, just don't think of elephants. And then you just sit there thinking about elephants. And so you know, when you're with a big company saying to innovate, you got to act. Just don't think about the bottom line, and that's all they think about. And so it's really, I mean, and so a lot of business school is about the study of business, which is really different from business, right? And so you need that combo. And what we're trying to do at the Media Lab is we're practice over theory. We really shun scholarship. We're really about just try it. And if it works, try to then figure out what's going on. Because in the act of trying it, so this focused kid, you give them complete permission, you let them fail if they want to, but the thing is you just let them go and do it. And then once they do it, then they'll stumble and they'll say, hey, there's something over here, there's something over there. But if you sit and try to give them permission or not, then it doesn't work.
Well, you're in academia and you have the safety net of academia, but in terms of the real world and the business world where the bottom line does matter, how can people in this audience who are bosses, who want to have innovation and creativity in their companies and in their businesses, but do have to keep the bottom line in mind, how can they foster exploration in their companies?
Well, oftentimes it comes down to this sort of reverence for numbers, right? So if you go into, just talking to an investment bank last week, and I'm talking about, well, ROI, you know, you should not focus on ROI. I tell them the story. I tell them the story of lots of stories, but Google is one that I come back to. You know, the fact that the founders of Google, after 9 months, were willing to sell Google to Yahoo for $1 million. Yahoo turned them down because it's somewhat flawed ROI analysis. But if and people must say, well, you know, they were just stupid. Well, but in that case, so were the founders of Google, right? Because they only valued Google at $1 million. The ROI piece is flawed. Well, that doesn't help because the whole world for somebody in an investment bank has been around numbers. Give me another number then. Mm-hmm. And the number that I sort of talk to, well, ask yourself, if you tried this and it didn't work, are you still okay? Can you try it again? What about 10 times? What about 20? What about 30? So I think for companies that are used to having structure in the way they operate and having a framework in how they analyze sort of the return, you still need to sort of give them something to work with, but it needs to be something else. It needs to be around what does it mean if it doesn't work, and how many of those can I try? And that sort of is the way we sort of set it up for clients.
I know that you of the mind that if the telephone company had tried to invent the internet, it would have taken years and probably failed. Or I can't remember how you say it. What was your point?
I often say that, well, the short version is, the cost of innovation has gone nearly to zero. If you look at Yahoo, Facebook, Google, they built the thing before they really raised any money. And in the old days, you'd sit and plan for years and years. So if the telephone company had tried to build Google, it would have cost $500 million, taken 10 years, and wouldn't have worked. Because you can build first. And that's what's great about the internet. And as you lower the cost of innovation, to sort of riff on the business side, the most money you will ever lose is the money you invest. My average, I've invested in, I do startup investing in like Twitter and Kickstarter and others. I invest in a lot of companies. My average investment is probably $100,000. The most I will ever lose is $100,000. It's not a lot of money. But then if you try to figure out what's going on, I mean, the time that we've been sitting here is probably worth more than $100,000 every minute. That's ticking. And so if the cost of figuring out whether to do something exceeds the cost of doing it, then don't think about it so much, right? And I think that's the problem, is that people still assume that the cost of failure is huge when it's not. And most of the opportunities of all those $100,000 investments, a couple of them make asymmetrical returns. And what you're missing is the opportunity to invest in these things because you're sitting around thinking about it rather than doing it.
What it raises, though, is an interesting question, because, so that's exactly right. The thing is, of course, then, well, which opportunity should you pursue? Because if there's lots of small ones, there's the options begin to proliferate, and there's just, it could be dozens or hundreds of thousands even, depending on sort of where you're sitting. And and once again, sort of, well, it comes down to selection criteria. And once again, one feels this attraction. It's like gravity. You're getting pulled into, well, okay, but which ones would have the greatest impact for the smallest amount of investment, et cetera? You go back into that type of thinking in order to even make the choice. And I know we talked about this before it came on, and I know that Sir Ken is going to get to this. I'm guessing. I don't know, but I'm guessing. It's just to do with passion, right? Are you willing to? Do you have the wherewithal to go through the inevitable mistakes you're going to make if you embark upon this idea? If you have that wherewithal, which is what I call passion, the reason, sort of almost an illogical reason to keep on pursuing, even though sort of this seems to be some empirical evidence that says that this doesn't work, I'm still going to try it one more turn, one more twist, one more pivot. That sort of becomes a more important selection criteria in those situations that you're talking about.
And I realize it's sort of cliche to say this, but it's true, which is every failure is a discovery. And you don't actually get that much data being right, because you're just, oh, I'm right. And it actually reinforces the irrationalities that you have. But every failure that you do, you're collecting data. So if you think about the $100,000 failure that I do each time as an investment in my learning, and I'm kind of stupid. I was really bad at school. Whenever people said, don't go there, I'd go there. And I would never learn anything until I actually failed at it myself. I didn't read books about other people's failures. And so if you can, and this is why it's good to do it when you're young, because the cost of failure is cheaper when you're young, right? But I think that if you just turn the ROI around and think about it as an essential learning experience, because you want to fail before your competitors do, so you figure out how to do that before the cost of failure goes up really high.
Right.
Well, where does fear play into this?
Sometimes I hear, this is particularly true for large organizations, but I mean, you see it all over, either people talking about their careers or whatnot, is that fear, fear is what holds us back. I'm not so sure that is true. I think that the way a large company, for instance, would approach innovation tends to be, well, here's an example. We tried something, and it was a $20 million project, and it didn't work. And look what happened to the people that were involved in it. They have a right to be afraid. Well, yeah. Well, it's a $20 million. I mean, if you screw up on that, and the company's not willing to do multiple $20 million bets, then it's going to have negative impact. But if you actually brought that down and you said to somebody, look, you're going to get to try something. It'll be maybe $100,000 at stake. If it doesn't work, your reputation really takes no hit. You're going to find that almost across the board, employees in companies will find their risk tolerance increasing dramatically. Okay, I mean, given those circumstances, I will now try. I'm willing to try it. In a recent conversation with CEO, he was telling me that he had spent $3 million asking this manager to come up with something interesting, and she hadn't. What should he do? He said. should I give, and I told him, would you give another 3? And he said, no, of course not. She screwed up. Well, that's the problem. What you should have done is taken that 3, chop it into 6 $500,000 chunks, guarantee it all 6, and now you're going to see the risk tolerance go up. She would have been willing to take risks that she didn't actually know was going to work when she started. So I'm not sure that people are, that risk is the great resistor of pushing innovation. But it's the circumstance.
But I do think that the fear of failure is a tremendous problem. And I was thinking about it when I was watching the Boston Dynamics. I used to snowboard a lot. And when you are first of all, you'll never learn to snowboard by reading papers about snowboarding. But secondly, when you are snowboarding and you're going through a really hard corner, the minute you visualize yourself falling flat on your face, you do, because your body dynamics fail. And if you can visualize yourself going through, sometimes you still fall flat on your face, but usually you make it through. And it's really interesting when you're in those moments where you really need all the body dynamics going, how horribly debilitating and failure-prone fear is. And it's the same with luck. If you think you're lucky, you're looking around for peripheral vision. The minute you don't think you're lucky, you're focused and you don't see the opportunities. So I do think that the psychological state of mind is a really, really important one, both in the probability of success and the ability to act.
Question to both of you. Do you think innovators are born or can they be created? Explorers and innovators.
I definitely believe that people can learn to innovate. The kindergarten stage that you're talking about may, because of circumstances in life, because choices we made sort of becomes path dependent, may become squeezed and beaten out of us. But we can return to it. And I think it is true that under certain contexts, we are more innovative than under others. So maybe it is so that some people have retained it more easily than others. Okay, fair enough. But I think it is true that across the board, each and every one of us can increase that ability.
I definitely think that it's the environment, but like if you look at the number of dyslexic CEOs is very high. I was terrible at school because I wasn't a good reader. My sister's a straight A student, double PhD, magna cum laude, Harvard, Stanford, blah, blah.
You dropped out.
I'm a failure, right? But now she's having to learn to innovate. I know how to innovate, and I'm trying to learn how to educate. But it's interesting because I think that people who are challenged very early tend to have to figure out their own cognitive models. And the thing is that when you have to figure out your own cognitive model, it becomes much more flexible because education is what somebody does to you, and learning is what you do to yourself. And when you do it yourself, you become somewhat you don't create these structures that education does. I think education is the worst possible thing that you can do to somebody if you want them to be innovative.
I wish we had another 20 minutes after that. In our last minutes, can you give our audience a takeaway, something that they can take away back home that they can use in a small meeting, use in a big meeting, use personally, to help them become or tap into their inner explorer or their inner innovator?
Well, I would say this. Whatever it is that you're pursuing, whatever challenge, opportunities that you're looking at, you are probably wrong about what you think is going to be happening, what the right answer is. That doesn't mean that you can't act. It just means that once you get started, reality will show you the way through its answers. And you're going to discover the solution by executing. So ultimately, the takeaway is act as if you're actually going to be wrong. And that means be willing to explore. I think that's very liberating.
Mine's actually kind of similar. I actually had the opportunity to speak after a futurist recently who was very smart. So then I kind of threw the ball and then said, well, I don't believe in futurists. I believe in nowists. Because the future is usually wrong and your plans are usually wrong, so it's much better to focus on what you're doing now and be resilient and able to react. And everything that's an asset, lines of code, intellectual property, people, money, those are all liabilities to agility, right? And so I think what's really important right now is to be ready for anything, and it definitely ties into what you're talking about. And it really is sort of assuming that you're going to be wrong about everything. And so it's a pretty liberating feeling.
Yeah.
We're liberated. You've got a plane to catch. You've got a book signing. Thank you so much, both of you.